So I'm just going to introduce next Bob Fraser, and Bob's going to talk with us about and give us his own insight into GIFEC implementation and how we can meet the pace and consistency and the vision that Phil referenced a little bit earlier. So, Bob.
I've got a radio mic, is that okay? Does that sound okay? Yep. Okay. Thanks, George. I'm sort of glad to see that without any sort of coordination, I would say that my presentation, I think, it covers different bits of everyone else's presentation, so it's a wee bit of a summary of the day just by total chance. One of the main things that I was asked to do was to give a view to what the statutory guidance had brought to us and the consultation on the statutory guidance on the Children and Young People's Act, what had come out of that. And the consultation's just finished, so we can't say an awful lot around about the written responses, but I probably can give you a wee bit about when we have engaged with a number of stakeholders and some of the key issues that they're bringing up. And it's interesting because some of the key issues that they're bringing up, and I'm going to go back to basics here, are really at the base of GIFREC. And so some of the things that people are asking is do we really need a named person for every child? Do we really need that? Shouldn't we target the resources on the most vulnerable? Do we really need to expend resources onto every child? Is that what we want to do? And other questions around about, well, what exactly is a wellbeing concern? When should I act in regard of wellbeing? What is that about? So that we're getting some quite serious questions coming in, and as well as, well, what are we going to do about if we do identify these wellbeing concerns, what are we then going to be doing around about responding to the wellbeing concerns? Do we have the capacity to do that? So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we actually got here into why we're going forward with a named person for every child, why the whole concept of wellbeing is so important, and I'm going to give you a sort of insight into where we're going with this. Okay. This is a slide that you saw this morning. Jerry McCartney had it. Total coincidence. And what it is what we're trying to demonstrate here is that this slide could be many of Jerry's slides, and what it's demonstrating is clearly the relationship between poverty and outcomes and inequalities. And we can quite clearly see, again, that those that are most deprived have the poorest outcomes. And it's a slide that probably nags at you for targeting, doesn't it? It's not supporting the universal approach. It could be, we could have put up there unintended injuries for children or dental caries or many other slides that Jerry was showing. This is a different sort of perspective, and there are some very slight variations here. There are slight variations in regard of deprivation, but actually in regard to the mental health for our children and young people and how they view their mental health, it's quite a narrow gap between the most affluent to the least affluent. And again, there is other areas where that's reflected as well. Jerry showed the huge gap in regard of obesity, but actually for overweight children, it's much narrower as well. We still have a lot of problems universally across Scotland for our children. Drinking within teenage years, smoking for teenagers at school as well. There isn't that big a difference actually all the way across the different quintiles. So this sort of pushes towards thinking, well, perhaps there is an argument for universalism. And so probably what we're trying to see here is there is an argument on both sides. So we're talking about what getting it right's about and what the Act is about and what it supports is progressive universalism. So we strengthen universal services, we identify the need, and we give rapid access very quickly onto the targeted services and strengthening targeted services. So within the Children and Young People's Act, that's the connection that we have between identifying wellbeing concerns, the named person is a focal point to provide the initial supports, and then the statutory framework around about child's plans and the statutory requirements for other organisations to be able to cooperate to support addressing wellbeing needs. But we're entering into a new world, aren't we? And GIFREC in the Act is trying to build on that as well. It is based on, it's got an evidence, maybe not evidence-based, but evidence-informed. Each part of this is very much evidence-informed. What we know is that the more person-centred you are, the more person-led care is. The more that we are outcome-focused, the more we work in partnership. And when we've all talked about partnership, which is again there today, it's partnership with parents, partnership with your other services within the health service or education or with social work, on the third sector and all the different parts of the third sector. So partnership is critical. We know that all of these improve outcomes, and that is what we're trying to achieve through this Act. So we're trying to take a whole new view of how we move forward, working in partnership with a progressive and universal approach. And the big question we come to as often is, did you really have to legislate? Legislate for a named person? For every child? Legislation is so difficult because it's so rigid. Why did you have to legislate for this? And it was quite a bold decision to legislate around about the Children and Young People's Act and within the GIFREC provisions within the Children and Young People's Act. It was a very bold decision by ministers to do that, and it took a lot of thought. But I mean, we were heartened by the impact of what happened with the smoking ban, because for many years we've been trying to improve and trying to develop, and what we see here is there was a significant impact in the smoking ban, and this is reflecting what was it, admissions for asthma into hospital, and there's lots of other things that went along with that, changes in practice, changes in policy, but we do think that legislation actually played a part within this. So we thought perhaps, as we are driving forward, and you heard from Phil this morning, GIFREC had been evolving and developing for 10 years. And to be honest, we had really not achieved the consistency and the pace of change that we wanted after 10 years. That's a long time to wait. And again, to be honest, it's when it got difficult, it fell down. Where it was easier, people found out that it was easier. Where it was difficult, families, it began. Where it was complex, where it was cross-border transitions, that's when it began to actually fall down, and it wasn't working particularly well. So policy on its own was really failing the ambition of GIFREC. That's the only way to describe it. It really was not achieving for us. And so legislation brings its own difficulties, and it is very rigid, but we feel as if in the longer term this will deliver for us. So what did we legislate for? Just a wee bit of a reminder of what we legislated for. So the key duties and what I want you to think about here is well-being, well-being, well-being. It keeps coming up. That's the focus of what we're talking about here, and we need to understand well-being better. So we did take forward a description of well-being within the Act. And what we've said is we have described well-being. So when public services are talking about well-being for children and young people, they are talking the Shinari indicators. And we'll go on and explain it a wee bit better later on. Not going into great depth about it, but a wee bit better later. So we describe it, and then, again, building and well-being, a named person for every child to promote, support and safeguard their well-being. So the named person is an entitlement for children. It's an entitlement for children and young people made available to them. Not imposed on them, it's made available. It's an entitlement for children and young people to have a named person. And where there are needs identified, we have that single coordinated planning framework for children and young people. And again, talking about the universal and targeted approach, we also are talking about having that within our population children's services planning and new duties and wider duties onto health boards, in particular for children's services plans. So back to this, why make a named person available for every child? Why did we do that? Is it really necessary? Well, I think that part of it is, as we've shown earlier on when we're talking about universal services, although the gap is wider in regard of those who are usually our groups where we would usually target or profile towards, there are still many, many children and young people with needs who are within those other groups, who are not in the usual targeting and profiling groups where we want to target. So we want to help all children and young people to achieve all they can be. That's what we want to do. And also the named person itself came from the Highland Pathfinder, where it was the families who told us that what they wanted was the single point of contact. And they wanted somebody to help them when they needed help. Quite simply, what they were saying is when you need help, it's often not available. If you've had ongoing help and support for a long time, then you can escalate it up easier. But if you suddenly need help for your child or young person, often it's not available. You don't know who to go to. Whoever you go to, it's not sure it's actually them who's meant to deliver that. Not taking responsibility for the well-being of children and young people. And then we have delays and that we miss the opportunity for early intervention, and that's what we want. We want children and young people to have support, the families to access support as early as possible. So that's why we feel that it is right to have a named person service made available to be an entitlement for every child and young person. And what does it offer? Well, as I was describing there, what it really offers us is the advice, information, direct support or access to support, and it's on tap. You know who to go to. There's somebody available to do it, and they should understand it's their responsibility and also have the capacity and capability to be able to deliver on the named person service. So back to this well-being, and you'll all be very familiar, if not all of you, the vast majority, so I'm not going to spend much time on well-being and the Shinari indicators, but it's enough to say that what we're trying to do is connect the indicators and well-being, positive well-being, to positive outcomes. That's what it's about, and it is getting back to basics. Positive well-being, positive outcomes, but for all children, not just the usual suspects, not just for those that we profile and identify frequently as those in need. For every child has well-being, every child deserves to have positive well-being. We have it, just a wee side note, we use these Shinari indicators, and you're all familiar with that term, and you're familiar with the 8 indicators there. But a number of people have said to us, perhaps you want to have some additional indicators or different indicators. So we've had suggestions that we should have love, hope, spirituality, and a few others that have been put in there as well. I'm not wedded. The act is there at the moment. But in future, in a few years' time, if people feel that that's right, then they should change that. What we're wedded to is the whole idea of a child's well-being. How we understand it or how we describe it can move and develop and evolve. But what we believe in is that we should have positive well-being and maximise the positive well-being for children and young people. So if those things change later on, that's fine. Still, well-being is what we're talking about, and the well-being of our children and young people to achieve the most positive outcomes. Again, I'm not going to talk about this an awful lot. This is the national practice model. It's more a description around about, we're used to using the national practice model for perhaps being attuned to when well-being concerns appear, to be responsive to being when well-being concerns appear. And then we use the My World triangle there in the middle to understand a child's life and what are the impacts on well-being at any time. The resilience matrix to help us prioritise in regard of a child's life, and how we want to consider working in partnership with everyone, how to address the well-being issues or concerns, and then the planning framework around about get a plan in place to address well-being concerns. I think that works well, and it's really well understood. I think it particularly where we have children with significant problems, complex problems, I think that is pretty well understood. I think that people are talking to us about they're struggling to understand how it applies on an everyday basis to the vast majority of that universal children and young people. How does that apply? How do we think about well-being in regard of children and young people for those who, again, maybe just aren't in the usual targeted groups? So I had a long think about that. And I thought, I'm going to think about something a wee bit different and think about this differently. I need to think about well-being differently to be able to try to communicate this slightly differently. And there was a few papers around about well-being by Dodge who describes well-being as we all have well-being. Everyone has well-being. We all have well-being. Every child and young person has well-being. And they describe it as no matter what I'm getting told 5 minutes, but that's okay. But no matter what your background, no matter what your social circumstances, you can have well-being within that. And that's okay. And so, but you may come from a much more affluent area and your well-being can change significantly as well. So I'm thinking, how do we understand this? So they describe it as well-being is when it's an equilibrium. It's a balance. It's having a balance in your mind and being content with where you are. So it's when the resources that you have as an individual, as a person, balance out with the challenges that you're facing. And any of us, if you weigh those challenges a little bit too much, then your well-being will roll to a more adverse area and you will begin to struggle within that, and that can happen to anyone at any time. And what we need to do at that point in time is we build on the resources to build that back up and readdress that balance and re-achieve that equilibrium. So for all of our children and young people, no matter who they are, on a day-to-day basis, that seesaw moves every day. During the day, it moves. It moves for all of us during the day. Before I come up here, it was probably tipped a wee bit down there to that challenges, a bit worried. It's balancing out a wee bit just now. I'll feel a bit euphoric later. But it's getting there. It's that balance. And underneath it, all of that is pivotal on our world. It's what's happening to us. Impacts from our lives elsewhere. So for every child and young person, they're sitting there, they've got the resources and their challenges, and their well-being sits in the middle. Do they have well-being no matter who you are? And it all balances on top of their current environment and their circumstances, as we were talking about earlier as well. And it's maybe just a different way to access and think about well-being, and an easier way to think about well-being for every child and young person that you deal with, every family you deal with. Basically, are there resources and matching? Are other challenges outweighing? And what can I help to put a bit of weight on that left-hand side to help rebalance that and bring their well-being back into a wee bit of equilibrium? So it's just a wee bit of a different way of thinking about things. So I spoke a lot about well-being and a lot about the named person and the challenges. I haven't spent a lot of time talking about Child's Plan. I didn't plan to. Enough to say that the Child's Plan is where we have put in a statutory framework around about supporting the targeted intervention. So when you address wellbeing needs, when there are wellbeing concerns, we need to take action. The Child's Plan, and within the Child's Plan, is where we can put and support the targeted intervention and ensure children and young people get that support. A couple of really, really important things about that. Very clear duties in there for public bodies to work together and be responsive to the wellbeing concerns of children and young people. They must be responsive. There's a few caveats where they don't need to be, but generally they must work together. There's a duty of cooperation on all public bodies to address children and young people's needs. Again, partnership. It's all about partnership with families. It's all about partnership with the resources that you have available. The third sector, I see Maureen sitting here. But it's about accessing those resources within a Child's Plan. The Child's Plan is about outcome focused. In health and within public services, we have been so focused on processes, inputs, outputs, and we're not often focused on outcomes. That's what matters to children and families. That's what should matter to us. That's what we should be focusing on. And the Child's Plan is very, very focused on an outcome focus. So, in summary, very quickly, the Children and Young People's Act, Getting It Right for Every Child, it really is around about a progressive and universal approach, targeting the support for universal services at the same time as supporting the much more targeted and vulnerable groups. That's through the Child's Planning process. We are trying to address inequalities through some of that targeting as well, particularly within the Act through the children's services planning, which is just out with our GIFRIT, but the integrated children's services planning, which should be addressing inequalities. And we're getting down to this whole concept of well-being. If you go away with anything today, any thoughts today, it's about thinking about the well-being of individual children and what you can do at any time to support the well-being of those individual children and families. What resources do you have that you can weigh on to that left-hand side to rebalance that in any creative way? And that's all I have to say today. Did I make it in time? Oh, I nearly had the red card. Seconds off it.